and welcome to a new episode. The topic for today's episode is the effects of travel on your brain. Discussing this is important for promoting self-care, preparing for future trips, and raising awareness about the impact of travel on our mental health and well-being. And our guest for this episode is Robin. She is a travel, language, and personal growth junkie behind our connected world. She is now a travel life coach and language educator for intentional solo female travelers. And she also has a background in psychology. And Robin, thank you so much for your time and for being here with us.
Thank you, Lou, for the great intro and for having me here. I'm super excited because I've been following your podcast for a while now.
Thank you so much. And well, since you're here and for our listeners to get to know you better, can you tell us about how did you start your journey and how did you end up creating our connected world? And also, can you tell us what your brand is about as well?
Yeah, sure. Oh, well, funny because I'm on a podcast saying this, but actually it all started with a podcast. So I used to be a former host during the pandemic. I was missing traveling. I was missing listening to people's stories and, having those random conversations with strangers. And so I started a podcast called Journeys Untold. And I was hosting people who were doing, whether it was travel or culture related, but kind of like sharing their stories and how they're helping other people with their businesses or projects that would follow. And after that, it kind of like followed. Like after that, I was like, well, I want to kind of brand this. And then going from the podcast, I started to realize that I also wanted to help people. Like I also wanted to create something that was mine with my own skills. So I started to go into this entrepreneurial, like from content creator to like entrepreneurial sort of way. And thanks to, a bit of my business and marketing background as well, career-wise, I started building my brand. And the name kind of came one day, just out of nowhere, because actually of one of my tattoos that I have here. You probably won't see it on a podcast, but I have a tattoo that says basically my motto, like a motto that I don't care, like I can be 80 and this is something that is very important for me, which is explore and connect. And I realized, throughout my life, my travels and so on, how important for me connection is. And by that, I mean like connecting not only to myself, but also to others and places and nature. So that's why. And I was like, well, that's kind of what the travel does, right? Like it connects our world, it connects our people, it opens our mind to all of this. And so our connected world, the brand as well, was born, and it's all about slow travel as approach to traveling, languages, of course, as a language junkie myself, and personal growth, finding personal growth through all of this. So yeah, here we are today.
Oh, that's amazing how one thing led to the next one and the next one and the next one. But it all at the core, it had those two words, explore and connect. Because starting a podcast is about connecting with your listeners. And also, everything that is related to travel is about exploring. Yeah. That's great.
Thank you. Yeah, no, 100%. It's funny, as you say, like, you just never know. Like, sometimes that's how life rolls, right? Like, I didn't know when everything started that this would have been what I do and what I am today, right? But it all also makes sense, like in hindsight. I'm like, okay, no, I think I was kind of like supposed to turn this into what I do now. So pretty happy with it. And now it's been about a year of like servicing women around the world. So
let's dive into that. So what can you tell us about the probably cognitive benefits that you have seen, not only in yourself and also working in your clients?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, psychology is a big part of, the approach. And as you said, it's kind of, how people say, oh, I feel good after traveling. I feel good about knowing I have a trip. It's literally like scientifically, there's a reason why. And I would say there's two main aspects of it. The first one that I think is a very important, and it's a study that Dr. Diamond conducted. She found in like the 60s, so relatively recent. I mean, psychology is relatively a recent science. She found out that the belief that we had that was like the brain is this, you're born like that, there's no changes to it, it's like this solid, unchangeable asset we have, was actually changeable. Like you can change, you can create, what is called like the wiring of the brain. So basically how the neurons communicate and are connected, which also means that's how we react to stimuli from the outside, from the surroundings, can change. And this is something called neuroplasticity, which basically means that we do have the opportunity through experiences to rewire our brain. And one beautiful thing that happens when you travel is you put yourself into new worlds, into new stimuli, whether it's smell, even like small things like smell or a color, right? Like, those, you go suddenly in a tropical, or you go to the Amazon or a tropical country and you see different colors, like birds with other colors you haven't seen and connected. And so this thing called dendrites, which are like basically the tree part of the neuron that connects the different neurons, they grow and develop. And so you create new ones. And by doing that, what's happening on a brain level is you're literally creating new pathways. And those new pathways create creativity, create more, for example, just like different type of like hormones. So like your stress hormones go down, the hormones that go around, and that depends like how you feel, that makes you feel happy or not, that all changes. And I think it's beautiful. And I think it makes totally sense, that we do have neuroplasticity, do have a brain that changes, because even just thinking when you're born and you're a kid, the way you develop and the skills that you build, it cannot just be that all of a sudden you switch on a light on one side of your brain, like because you're 4, and then when you're 6, you switch on another one, right? Like, no, we're always using the same, like we always use the whole brain, right? It's just about what do we have as a connection and what is the wiring. And all of that, to be honest, is what you experience in life. So literally, yeah, experiences build your brain, which build your thoughts, which build how you see and perceive reality.
That's great. I'm so glad that you started this conversation talking about neuroplasticity, because we go on a trip and we feel good and we feel somewhat different, but why? And then, and also I saw that study that people used to believe that you're just the way you are, and that's it. Like nothing will change you. But no, there's actually scientific evidence that experiences will change you. So that's why it's important to always get out of your day-to-day environment and also to your day-to-day routine and live new experiences, because as you mentioned, like so new brain cells will fire together and develop new neural pathways. Also about what you said about the hormones, of course, like we also, not only that we're living new experiences, but also we have more free time. We're doing things that we enjoy. So our brains are not segregating so much cortisol, which is the stress hormone, but actually is releasing more dopamine and oxytocin, which are related to the happiness hormones. So Robin, I want to ask you that by working with your clients, have you noticed in one of those women that changed in the sense that she was feeling a certain way in a certain negative way, and then by working with you and going on a trip and doing a slow travel, there was a difference in their well-being and way of feeling?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's a great question, because it is a very important part of not only what I do, but also what I believe, which is kind of the whole well-being and mindset aspect of traveling. So with my clients, of course, like we do a preparation before they're even abroad, so that they are ready to face certain challenges abroad. So for example, even just like loneliness, dealing with uncertainty, dealing with things that don't work out as planned, right? Which is very common, especially when you travel. I think there's two. So there's a bit of like, what I notice is a difference before they leave, just with the work that we do in preparation for their moving abroad. So what I do is, it's a lot of really like almost mindfulness practices and finding what works. And a lot of it is based also, of course, on psychology techniques. And I believe that mindfulness, the reason why I like it and can like feel more attached to it than maybe like pure spirituality, is because I generally see it connected, like even breath work and things like that. I'm like, yeah, it makes sense, because it does, for example, breath work. What happens is that our physiology, or like how we, for example, feel and do, like, for example, we start breathing really fast, we can induce our brain to think that there is a danger, which induce that fight and flight reaction, right? And we can really induce those emotions in there. So of course, it's almost like biohacking in a way, right? Like finding those techniques that help you grow your brain and like use the brain in a way that you can also control those emotions, which also means controlling, for example, doing activities that help certain hormones, like the ones that you mentioned, right? The good hormones we have, which is also, I call them also travel hormones, because it is something that, because of what you experience while traveling, is very much produced by your brain, which is exactly oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, and serotonin, right? So there's a lot of this work that happens before. And then what I noticed is I had this client last year, actually, she was moving to Spain. And she was mostly like afraid, like while she was abroad, we were still speaking, of course. And I was asking, and she mentioned that one thing that she found hard was like, for example, like making friends and things like that. And one fun thing about actually traveling is that traveling opens up new pathways of also empathy. And by that, it also helps you connect with people differently. So through all the also, the work and the exercise and the practice that we did before she left. So she knew kind of like, okay, there's a problem, there's a challenge. This is how I regulate my nervous system. This is how I regulate my emotions. This is how, what this means. She found a way, she was telling me, she found a way to, instead of dealing with this, like, oh my God, I'm alone, I'm lonely, oh God, this was the worst decision ever, which happens, right? It's a bit, not great at first when you move, you're all alone, you don't know anybody. Sometimes maybe you don't even speak the language, right? I mean, too. So, it's not the best feeling, and community and having those connections is super important. So what she did was using that to deal with the situation. So being able to not, let's say, dramatize and like just go into dig a hole and just not getting out of it, but using those techniques in order to be able to, take this and try to turn it into a proactive action. So she started, reaching out to people. You have to put effort, right? And this is one thing that I always tell my clients too. Once you decide to take this life, once you decide to move abroad, you also accept the fact that in all your relationships, you will have to put the extra effort, because you have to put the extra effort to stay in contact with the people back home. You have to put extra effort to make friendships when you're like the new girl in town, right? So there's a lot. And I think like it was a big preparation. And of course, she was able to resolve it that way. And then because of those new connections, those new conversations she had, what she was telling me is like, she was surprised to see how different certain ways of living were. She told me like she was really like, seeing this. I thought this was this one way to do things, right? Like, for example, there's only one way to live, one way to think, like even like religion and things like that. And she was telling me like even that like really opened her mind to it. And I think after that, and here comes the empathy part of, traveling, and that part of effects that it has on the brain is she was more able to put herself in other people's shoes. So I think like her relationship skills overall, I would say, really like improved, and communication improved, and decision making improved, and all these things happened because she was prepared to, keep under control the emotions and be proactive once the challenge and the problems came. And then thanks to being able to live those experiences positively, like turn it into a positive learning experience, she was then able to find those benefits, such as like bigger empathy, which brings to be better at building relationships and so on.
Wow, I'm so glad you brought up the empathy part, because that is so important. And I don't think I have heard much about it in the travel industry. It's like, yeah, it's great, you feel good, and it opens your horizon. But yeah, the empathy part. Why are we friendlier when we're abroad? And why we are able to put ourselves into other people's shoes. Like, at least that for me was a big one. I am like from a small country in South America where a lot of travelers used to go to, and then I moved to this big giant, the United States. And I still, like, since I grew up in the same place with the same people and everything the same, it was hard for me to understand different cultures, and especially here in the United States, that is a melting pot. And it's like, well, why these people from this culture do this or do that? But just then as I progress and travel, I was able to just understand that nothing is weird. It's just different, and everywhere in the world is different. So I'm glad that also your client was able to come to some realizations as well. Now that you mentioned that she was moving to a country that doesn't speak the same language, how many languages do you speak?
4.
Okay. Okay.
Italian, English, German, and Spanish.
Got it. I checked your Spanish is really good. What do you know about, the effects of learning a new language?
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, I could go on forever about that. I mean, obviously travel and languages both have great effects. And in a way, funny enough, that empathy and creativity and those kind of like brain effects that you have to travel is also because you are exposed to new languages. So overall, I would say in general, there's a lot of studies that show, like, for example, bilingual kids and, people growing up with exposed to different languages kind of think differently, and they tend to be more creative and better at problem solving. The thing is that when you speak different languages or you have to learn a new language, you again are starting to use new pathways. You're starting to create those new pathways. And then when you switch between languages, I mean, to me, sometimes I feel like but there's a black hole in my brain sometimes when I speak, like when I switch into too many. But what it really does is, like, it's almost you are activating like those different parts in your language area of the brain. So it really is like kind of like doing puzzles and crosswords. That's the word. Crosswords and puzzle and things like that. It's almost like a brain exercise to keep it young and challenging, right? Like your brain actually does like to be challenged. And that because it does actually like to create those new connections and pathways and so on. So language is basically that on steroids, right? Like you are learning not only new words and all of this, it's almost becoming like a kid again who has to learn, to say things, right? Like you're going through the same thing you went through when you were like, whatever, 2. I think kids start speaking when they're around 2 years old, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of the beauty of it. And I understand, like, I think the creativity comes from the fact that you have to almost like find those words, right? Like even just, for example, the associations you may have, and you notice when you learn a second language, and you may even like learn a certain word associated to that language. I have some words I don't even know in Italian because I just learned them in English, or I learned them in Spanish. It's like, I don't really know how to translate this because this is the word I mean, And again, you create all these new associations. And I think the beautiful thing, and that's a little bit more in the back end of language learning, is you're also learning about the culture and about the history of the place. And that's what I do also with my language clients. I think it's super important because a lot of like how we speak, the words we use, why we say certain things, so much has to do with what has happened in a country, why the language developed in a certain way. So I think because of that learning, that's why it brings so much so much brain benefit to it. And even if you're not learning actively a second language, even being exposed to it when you're traveling, your brain almost has to like solve this puzzle, solve this problem. And that is what kind of like helps building upon it. And again, activating all that good stuff in your brain, like literally wired in your brain.
Yeah, no, that's true. Actually, once I read that learning a new language activates a new part in your brain that it wouldn't otherwise. And also, yeah, every country I visit, I try to at least get an understanding of some words they use and why they use them, because yes, there is so much history behind the words everyone uses. And also I can only compare Spanish and English, but in Spanish we have this thing where we are not really accountable for our words or what we do. What I mean by that is that if I drop a cup, instead of saying, oh, I dropped the cup, you said something like, oh, the cup dropped by itself. So when I realized that, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. And also everyone says that Spanish is the language of love and this and that, and that, yes, we use a lot of like cute words towards other people, but that's also the thing, like to you can be at the supermarket and the cashier will call you mi amor, at least in Venezuela. So like understanding those differences, and in the States, it's not like that. It will take a lot for someone to call you my love. I wanted to bring that out, and also because also language and understanding the culture as well. It help you understand and increase your cultural competence, because every culture is different.
100%, which also helps what we said before, that empathy and putting yourself in other people's shoes is because of this knowledge that you created, right? You're like, oh, this person, for example, there's certain countries, among which India and apparently Bulgaria, I found out by going to Bulgaria during December, where they say, like, they shook their head to say yes, and they go up and down with the head. I'm like doing it and trying to like make this understandable for a podcast to say no. And like little things like that, where you're like, if you're not aware of that little cultural thing, you're like, is this person just being rude, or like what is going on, or like ways of being, like even like a bit personality wise, right? Like there's certain countries, I mean, I'm Southern too, right? Like I feel between Latin America and Mediterranean, we're kind of like culturally similar, but then you go to like more Nordic country, and then you proximity and like all of these things, they're just different. And it's not about, as you said at the beginning, like you learn that it's not about I am right and you're wrong and there's just one way to do it. Like you actually learn that there's so many different realities and there's so many simply differences. There's not that right or wrong. It's just like, okay. And then you understand it. And that's why you're able to be more empathic, because you have that explanation in your head where you're like, okay, that's maybe why this person is doing this, right? Like you're trying to go beyond just like the superficial act that the person has. Because also when you travel, and especially solo traveling, like you kind of have to get those cues, right? Like you have to like, feel the room, understand, and like it's between safety and just like connecting, as we said, right? Because of that need that you have when you solo travel, like you have to almost practice even more that extra empathy and that extra kind of like figuring out the other person, right? And I think this is a great thing, and that's why I always say, like, at least once in your life, do a bigger trip, do a longer trip, stay on the road for at least a month, and just try it. And then if you don't like it, great. But if you like it, I'll tell you, you'll be addicted to it. But and travel changes, and I think this is what I love the most, and probably also why it has so many effects on the brain, because again, it opens and it wires the brain in different ways, because we also realize that there's so many different ways, and so many, like, it's almost you also become more critical, you become more self-aware, you become just generally more conscious in a way, right? Like when you are in that daily routine and you're kind of stuck in there, you just go by autopilot. Like you don't question things, you're just like a machine in a way, right? This is why it's so important to even just take a break, or like take a break from that daily routine, whether it is even like a day trip, like do something different. I would say daily, but do it at least weekly, in order to have all these benefits, right? And in order to cut that routine that kind of lets you forget how much more there is and how much more you can do, and in a way live. Because our brain, the wiring of the brain is also how we experience the world, and by wiring it differently and finding those new pathways, in a way you're experiencing those new realities, you're experiencing more, like literally experiencing more, not just figuratively.
No, for sure. When everyone says it broaden your horizons, it pretty much broadens our reality, because you become much more aware of many different things. So, and also I want to ask you about the challenges as well, because it doesn't come without its challenges. And you said that the brain likes its challenges, but then also I will argue that also the brain likes to be comfortable, and we like to be comfortable and save energy, and also our brain keep us like safe from dangers. And this is like a primitive way of behaving, because we're not cavemen anymore and we don't have lions chasing us. So when we travel, there are a different set of challenges, and I want to start with these first two ones, because I think that this is so important, which is sleep. And when we sleep well, we feel good. And when we don't feel good. And so what do you think about this challenge of sleep deprivation and jet lag? And what has been your experience or something that you have observed in others?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great point because yes, our brain, I still believe it's our greatest asset, but it can also be our greatest enemy. And I think that's why, practicing certain, now they call it biohacks, and certain mindfulness practices can create that better kind of experience. So, jet lag wise, I have a recent experience that, like, I've usually been really good with jet lags. And the reason being that I was kind of again biohacking, so trying to get used to the time zone before being in the time zone. So a big thing for me has always been, for example, like knowing what time I would be there, and then I wouldn't eat, or I would try to sleep already on the plane, especially on long haul flights, and kind of adjust that way, right? So if it's like, even if it's for me 8 p.m., but I know it's like midnight or something, like bedtime where I'm going, I would just try to like force myself to sleep and try to kind of win it that way. You can also do this like even a week before going. If you're really like kind of scared of the jet lag, or you're more sensitive to it, you can prepare about a week before to really get into that routine. It's just that I think normally and realistically it's a bit harder because you have a job and all these things, right? So for me, it always has been on the flight. That's where where I start applying all of this, let's say, tricks. Funny enough, like I was also reading that jet lag and all of that can even actually affect like your periods and things like this, right? Like your hormones, your periods. There's a bigger effect that it has, and absolutely, it is almost like in a way distressing your body, right? And as you say, also we don't like to mess with our sleep. Humans need their 7, 8 hours sleep, and as you say, less than that, it's not good. And I mean, we all know we need our good sleep. So I think in general, I don't think it should be seen as like, oh my God, like I cannot go to this place because there's a bigger jet lag. I generally think like preparing for it to minimize the effects of that jet lag will help you experience it. And then if you're still having issues, like really take the first day to just adapt. Again, force yourself to eat when it's time to eat, because that's a big thing. So like it's light and it's food that kind of tells our body what time it is, right? So wherever you are, flight or the first day, if you're still a bit jet lagged, try to put yourself in that situation. Tell your body that it's morning. Tell your body that it's dinner time by eating, even though you're not hungry, even though it doesn't feel like right, and being like the dark and the light, right? Like force yourself to stay up and stay in the sunlight, and force yourself to find a dark room and like sleep in it, like go back to the hotel, hostel, wherever you're staying at, Airbnb, and just do that. But I think yes, absolutely. And then hopefully within the first, day, maximum 2 days, you can readapt and get your good sleep. But I think like those first 2 days are very fundamental. Like it can really like determine whether you're staying in the jet lag and then you're like missing out on like actually, especially if you don't have super much time. It's so important that if you have like, let's say a week or two, that you don't waste, 4 or 5 days just trying to get adjusted to it. So I highly suggest to do those tricks and then, yeah, pull through. So it's a bit of an effort at first, but it pays off so that you can be adjusted and living in the place.
No, definitely it's very important. I didn't care about my sleep before, and then I will just be on the go, 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 and then I will crash on the 4th, 5th day and be in bed for like 2 days. So definitely it's important to take care of that at the beginning so you don't crash and actually you enjoy the place you're in, the place that you put an effort to go to. And so yeah, thank you so much for all those tips. And then also, what do you recommend for dealing with unfamiliar environments and also cultural differences? I know we have talked about languages and some of that before, but it can be very hard on us, on our brains, because everything is different, and it can also create some sort of anxiety because we feel that pretty much everything is out of our control.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said before, it's true. I feel like our brain likes the challenges and likes that because it grows and it's good for it. but it's not that natural, right? Like I think like we really evolved to defeat that instinct in order to evolve our brain the way it is now. So being in a different environment, as you said, can create that distress, because fear and excitement are basically the same kind of emotion. It's just that fear is what your brain creates for you when it thinks it's danger. And it usually happens when it's something that the brain doesn't recognize. If it's something you've experienced before and it was a positive experience, your brain is like, yeah, no, that's excitement. Like, go for it, do it again. But if it's something new, or it kind of triggers a negative, let's say, memory or a negative emotion, your brain goes into that instinct, into that survival, into that, let's say, more automatic response, which is usually it's danger, which is usually that fight and flight response, which can cause you block even, or go into that anxious state, or just kind of being blocked, as in not knowing exactly what to do, and all the negative emotions that follow that, right? And even like raise of cortisol, the stress hormone. So in general, what I suggest to clients, friends, and whoever is going abroad, and especially when they go to extremely different, right? Like, I mean, if you go from Italy to Spain, or something like that, you're probably having a lot of like also familiarities. And but let's go, you're going from a Western country to an Eastern country. What I always suggest, and this is really a lot to do also with the language, I suggest always two things. The first one, and you kind of mentioned it, that you do it, which is great. I was like, yeah, that's a great thing that you do, which is getting familiar beforehand with the language.
Okay.
And I put together like this, like I call it like a mini guide of communication, which is like that super, super basic phrases and words that you need, and the alphabet. Because just like recognizing like letters, this is because like having that kind of like mini communication guide before going, especially if you go solo, it's important also to feel safer. I think like one of the worst things, and like the one that really is gonna put you in like super distress and anxiety moment, is not understanding what's going on around you. And especially, solo female travelers, I mean, we have also some extra challenges and worries, right? So understanding at least what is going around us, or knowing, okay, if I have an emergency, I know how to respond. I know people will understand me. I think it just puts our heart at peace. And even like bringing that mini guide with you, bringing that sheet that you prepared before with you can help. The other thing that helps with languages is offline language apps. Like now there's a couple that work at any time. You can even take, especially with like the languages that use a different alphabet, you can take a picture of it, and then it like tells you what it means. So kind of being prepared in that way, and preparing ahead, especially if it's like first time you go solo, or you're, let's say, less seasoned, and so you're less used to be in that situation. I 100% recommend that. And as for unfamiliarity, I think like, again, this is why I'm very big also on mindset. In my programs and in general in life, I think like it's really that turning, right? I gave the example of my client before, like turning that, let's say, what could be a negative moment into a learning and proactive moment. So for that, unfortunately, it really is that practice that you do. And I suggest to like do it daily. Like, how do you keep control of the emotion? How are you reacting in this way because it is actually a danger, right? Is it your gut feeling, like being right about it? Because it is. And I always say, like, follow it. But taking that moment and like realizing, especially again, when you're just kind of reacting because it's unfamiliar, it's not necessarily a danger, right? It's just like, oh, I don't know what it is. This is so different. Taking that moment and kind of like looking into that emotion, like, okay, why am I reacting like this? Like, why am I feeling like this? Is it truly like a danger? And like, you're basically like teaching your brain to realize that that is not a danger anymore, and induce that, okay, it's all good, brain, it's all good, boss. Please don't make me anxious about it. So I generally think it's creating that right mindset. I call it like that strong inner compass, right? Because that's what's going to guide you, especially on the road, especially traveling solo. You need to practice that mindset that you can rely on. You know that you can get out of that difficult situation. You know that you can turn something from bad to good. And you can rely on your gut feeling as well, because I would say that's a very big thing to have, especially traveling.
Now, definitely, it's very important to create that mindset before leaving, because maybe when you're traveling, you are in a different environment, but the good news and the bad news is that you're bringing yourself with you, so it
Very well
doesn't
said.
mean, yeah, it doesn't matter whatever you are, if your way of thinking and your mindset and the way you regulate your emotions and thoughts will always be with you. So better to work on that before going into the airplane. Thank you so much for all those tips. Definitely, they were great. And the mini guide, it's such a great tool. I will have never thought about that, but yeah, it's like you start getting familiar with the culture, with the language, with the place. So you can maybe feel more at ease once you get to that new place. Also, I want to ask you about homesickness. I know you've been around, I have been around myself, and I can only speak for myself. I remember when I first immigrated to the United States, homesickness was a big deal for me. And I remember I didn't know what depression was back there in Venezuela. And most Latin Americans I know, they always say, I don't have time to get depressed. But then later on, I don't say that right now, but definitely is something, it's a common saying. But right now that I know more about this topic, I know I got depressed, and I remember sleeping most of the day, probably 12 to 14 hours a day. So just because that was my way of escaping reality. So how have you dealt with that, or what advice can you give on this?
Yeah. So homesickness is a big deal, and the thing is that it can happen even throughout the years you've been abroad, right? Like you have this moment where it just hits you, and I think that's one thing that with the years abroad you also kind of just get to accept. Of course, if you are new to it and you just moved, of course, it is a challenge that you need to prepare for. It is not a reason to give up on. You left for a reason, and I always tell my clients also to go back to the why. There is a reason why you left. So I think there's two things. One of this that I would suggest. One of this is that one. You left for a reason, and that's why even doing the work and getting the clarity on what you want in life, because traveling and moving abroad, or becoming an expat, becoming an immigrant, that's a life change. That is just turning your life upside down in a way, right? So in order to treat it that way, you have to accept that there's going to be impacts and consequences of that dimension, some of which is very negative emotions can happen, right? So, and this is something that I say, it always helps, whatever big goal or small goal you have in life, you have a reason behind it. And doing the work to really go deep into why. You have this goal, okay, but why? Why is it important? Okay, but why is that important? And we tend to really not go deep. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to do this, and you just say it. And the fun part about setting goals and all of that is there's a big motivation behind it. And that motivation is actually what's going to save you in the moment, things go wrong. And I say this to whether it's somebody learning a language, or somebody moving abroad, or somebody doing a big, solo trip abroad. I tell them the same, because at the foundation, the common denominator is, if it's a challenging moment, we need to go back to our root, to really knowing that we've made that move, we made that decision for us, and whatever your why is why you should get up the next day, cry it out, get up the next day and do something about it. Which brings me to the second point. My second point is, once you go back to your why, which is your anchor, right? Mindset also very important, to trigger that response, where you're instead of let's say escaping it, you're bring you back to that, bring you back to almost a reflective moment, and cry it out. I always say, if you feel in a certain way, just feel like it. I think the most important thing in life is embrace all of your emotions, because it is how it is. It's positive and it's negative. That's just life, and we should embrace all of it, right? Life is balance of the good and the bad, right? So we cannot eliminate one from life just like that. I think that's very utopic. So the second thing to do after having that moment, clear out of all your emotions, especially if it's like the beginning, the next day is when you take action. So I want you to think about, what can I do today to get out of this state? Can I go take a walk in the park, talk to a stranger? Can I go sit down, have a coffee, and like start my day differently? Can I go and do exercise? Can I what is something that will put you out of that, and then do it? And then the other thing with homesickness specifically, and goes back to like, I guess my whole branding, but connections. So community, finding somebody else. I think like it's good and bad in a way that when you're first new in a place, you also tend to kind of like be attracted to people who are in the similar spot. So you try to really like stay with expats, you try to stay with somebody who speaks your language. And I think that's great in a way, because at least you go through those emotions and it's people who understand you. But like I always say, take that with a pinch of salt, because it's also, you moved for a reason, and like living in a new country without immersing yourself, without embracing the culture, without trying to learn something from it is also not in the long term what you want. So with sickness, it's really about connect with the people. That's why I say maybe like the good thing to do is take a walk in a park, talk to a stranger, find people online. Like I think like nowadays we're so lucky. Like when I started like traveling and all that, I was pretty young. I moved when I was like 12 for the first time, like with my family to, from Italy to Germany. So big difference in culture, in language. I mean, I spoke nothing but Italian at the time. So I had nothing. I had letters. There was not even internet or emails at the time. So then, I had emails, and that was the way I could like keep in contact with people. But once you're there, I mean, besides, I was lucky I was at school, but if I was any older, I would have had no way besides literally going to places and venues to meet people, because a smartphone wasn't a thing, right? So I think like nowadays we're really lucky that we can find people online. And I generally suggest to try to find local. There's a lot of local people and even platforms that you can find for the specific city you're in, that it's locals who want to bond with internationals, with like, people who just moved, and connect with them. Right? Like, I think it's good to have both. Find a community of expats, of people who are going through the same, find a community of like-minded women, find that, but always have on the side a way and your window into connecting to the locals, so that you can also start those friendships, because it's super important, especially because as you know, especially if you're an expat or you're on a working holiday, like kind of more in that limbo, or a digital nomad for whatever, whatever you're doing, like you're just working and you're moving more, that there's a difference. Like if you're just with, let's say, just with expats, just with the people who are traveling, those people also move, right? And they go away. So if you're truly trying to move abroad and stay there and build a life in that country, not necessarily in the city, but in that country, then you have to start connecting with the locals. You have to immerse and give it a try, because also I think it really tells you, do you want to stay or not? Because again, I think like a big scary thing, which also builds to that homesickness, like, oh my God, I left my home. Like, what's going to happen? It's also like when you have that panic and that moment, you also remind yourself not only why you went, but also that nothing is in stone in life. You don't like it, go away. But you cannot go away if you haven't tried it. And I think that resilience, and this is why, again, mindset is super important, building that resilience, where it's like, it's just a tough day. It's just a tough patch. But on the other side, there's so much more. The opportunities on the other side, the friendships, the relationships that you can build on the other side, that is why it's all worth it. So remember, it's not set in stone. It may just be a bad day. I wasn't sure if I could swear. So it may be a not great day, but go through it and then make a decision. Give yourself time, because those moments, that homesickness, it's a moment. It's temporary. I think I read recently, I forgot, but I read recently somewhere like a quote where it's like, everything in life is temporary. And I think it's, in a way, it's true. I mean, even life itself, if we want to go very philosophical, but it's just to remember, okay, this panic moment doesn't need, tomorrow is a different day. Let's go. And I think this is important because, to be realistic, that homesickness happens. It's not like that, for example, yourself, you moved, you've been abroad for a while. Myself too, it's been 18 years when I first moved abroad, and now 12 years by, just myself, like going around the world. But it's not that it doesn't happen again. It's just that you know how to react to it. And I think that's why it's super important to work on that, because then when these moments happen, loneliness, homesickness, you know how to react to it, because the reality is it's going to come back. Right. And it's going to come back in a way also different. Like sometimes I'm homesick, but also I know I belong outside of Italy. You know what I mean? Like I know I'm happy where I am. I have no idea if I'll ever go back. Maybe not. It's all open. Right. But the beauty of it is like, then when I'm back, I'm even like happier. I love it. Like I can see all the good things. Yeah, there's so much, and it's just worth it. And it's just worth to give yourself time to make a final decision on like whether you stay there and so on. So great question. Sorry, I had a lot to say about sickness. I think it's very important.
That was a great answer for sure. So have a strong why, and also create a strategy on how you're going to deal with these emotions. And I think what you mentioned is really important, that just going through those emotions, like if you have to cry, just cry, and just sit with it. That emotion is there for a reason. And also another thing that stuck with me was that nothing is set on stone. You move one, you can move again, and if you decide to stay in that country, get in contact with the locals and with people that live there, because if you're just hanging out with travelers, they are going to leave, and you will have to open that cycle again and go through those process and moments again. It's like falling in love with someone and breaking up right away, and then finding someone new and breaking up. So it's like that sounds very painful. So make sure to be in contact with someone that is there. And what you said about going back to Italy, you knew you didn't belong to Italy, but then when you go back, you really appreciate it. The same happens to me with my little hometown in Venezuela. So I always knew that was not my place, but once I left, it was really hard. But now I go, I'm like, I really appreciate it, but I know I don't belong here. And that's something, I think that's also something that happens to every traveler. I guess the neuroplasticity and your brain changes so much, and your horizons broaden so much, that it's kind of, you're just like a citizen of the world. It's like you kind of like, I don't belong here, but I don't belong there, but I feel good here right now. And it's just like this dance, and just enjoying and living life to the fullest. And Robin, I absolutely love everything you share with us, and I want to now ask you about any final thoughts. I know we discussed about the benefits on the brain, and thank you so much for everything you shared with us. And also we shared about the challenges, how to deal with homesickness. So do you have anything else that you would like to share with us?
Well, just maybe a couple more tips for your next trip that you in the audience that have planned. It's something that also goes back to everything we talked about, and really like making the benefits physical, like in the brain, and also like practicing a bit of mindfulness when abroad. So for those two tips is, number one, travel journaling. I think it's a great moment. And to be honest, I am somebody who I practice mindfulness, but I'm not there for 30 minutes. Mindfulness, but because of also how it fits my schedule, how I am, and how I find it effective. For me, there's 5 to 10 minutes. So sit there, and even there's a lot of 5 minutes journals and so on, just the same way you would do it at home. Sit and reflect on the learnings that you had that day. What did you learn? What was a great, memory of the day? Big, small, whatever it is. Maybe you didn't do anything. Maybe you just went to the cafe, but that, just sitting there and observing people is the memory of the day. And so there's a lot of also prompts you can find online and so on. But I generally feel even just having a little page, fill it out every day. And I think especially for your first solo trip, this is a game changer, because when you travel, it's easy also to kind of disconnect with yourself, because you are so busy with all these new things, and you're you're meeting people, and you're doing this and that. And one great thing about travel is that it really pushes you to be very present, very conscious, right? Like we talked about it, going conscious with your mind because you're living day by day. You're not like stressed by deadlines and so on, right? So to really maximize all those benefits on your brain, taking that extra effort and step to like sit down and journal about your day, even just for the first month, whatever you can keep, maybe longer if you're, finding the benefits of it, can really, first of all, it's a great memory in general that you can build, but also it can really set your experience deeper, because this is kind of like the whole point, and also like the whole point of like how it affects the brain is like when we travel deeper. So immersing yourself, exposing yourself to the culture and these things is what gives you all these benefits, is what taking that moment to reflect and learn and really like kind of like you have to practice it, right? Like it's all like new in a way, and really absorb all of that is what will build. Like the hormones, all that is kind of like automatic. You can't really control much of it. It's like, you have those all moments, oof, like cortisol is down now, great. But everything else is like maximize that experience, and it will literally be life changing. And that's why I guess I'm big on slow travel, because it's all about this. And the second thing is connecting actually back to that unfamiliarity. Another great thing besides language and so on, read the news, just like get a bit like acquainted to like what is going on in the country, right? And I think it helps with that feeling of, oh, I don't know how it looks like, or what people do, but it also again helps you travel deeper. Maybe you find something by reading about the place, you find something that you wouldn't have known like to do, right? Always leave something for spontaneity. Like always don't plan every single moment of every single day. No, because then you talk to somebody, you find out there's something really cool to do and you can't because life is planned to the minute. But inform yourself, right? It's all about learning. And this is the biggest thing about traveling. It's a continuous learning about yourself, about the world, and how to respect and live in this respectful kind of beautiful reality.
Wow. Thank you so much for everything you shared with us. And those are great. So mindfulness, and also I'm with you. I cannot meditate for 20-30 minutes, but I can also sit still for 5-10, but that also because of my personality as well. So, it comes with knowing yourself and know what matches your personality and what you feel good with. And that also comes from reflecting not only on your travel experiences, but from your day-to-day and just experimenting with life. So Robin, thank you so much. And before I end the interview, I want to ask you where anyone that is listening to this episode can find you.
Yeah, so the easiest way to find me is on Instagram at Our Connected World. I also have a website, www.ourconnectedworld.ca. But yeah, on Instagram, anybody can, if they have questions or whatever, can always DM me. Again, happy to connect, obviously.
Yeah, those are like part of your core, explore and connect. So that's great. I will make sure to leave those in the show notes. And thank you so much. It was very informative, and I really appreciate everything you shared with us tonight. So thank you so much again, Robin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Gracias.